While you were reopening, coronavirus surges in almost half the states. For Michigan, are those green lights turning yellow? And the fight over mail-in voting in Michigan. The Secretary of State will defend her position, but will let one of her chief critics weigh in too. Today is Sunday, June 21st, 2020, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. A very happy Father's Day, especially to one Colonel Bill Skillion down in Orlando, Florida. I've talked to my folks a lot this week. Florida is one of the many states watching a jump in coronavirus cases. In fact, just as many Americans were trying to put the virus in the rearview mirror, nearly 24 states hit their high marks going all the way back to the start of the pandemic crisis. From the reopening of businesses, especially restaurants and bars, to the scenes of protesters all over the country, often with no mask and seemingly no thought of social distancing. Some would say the virus surge is about the least surprising thing we could see. And we're reminded that right now, wherever you go, you're going to be at the mercy of the dumbest, most clueless person in the room. Now, Michigan has been getting a fair amount of applause. A British study this week found that the state's stay-at-home order saved perhaps tens of thousands of lives in our state. And yet, we still are faced with a fatality rate that is the highest in the country. What can explain that? And what has it taught us should we see a resurgence here? Coming up, we're going to talk with the state's medical director, Dr. Janae Caldoun. A little later on, we're going to dig into the ballot battle in Michigan. Can we, should we, must we vote by mail? It's all today on Flashpoint. All right, let's start this morning by turning our attention back to our worldwide public health emergency, and right now it remains exactly that, despite what feels like some folks letting off the brake. Let's talk about it with the state's top medical officer. Back with us again on Flashpoint, Dr. Janae Caldoun. Doctor, appreciate the time. You are, of course, paid to worry, but I'm really curious as to where your concern level is. As Michigan got some good report cards on the way that we've handled the science so far this past week. And now we are trying to reopen, and yet you watch what's happening around us in so many other states. Not really a second wave, but the continuation of the first wave. Where's your concern level today?
Right. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I think that the state and the people across the state have done a really good job as far as being safe, making good decisions, wearing masks, washing their hands. And that's why you see Michigan's numbers where they are today. But I certainly am concerned. I'm looking at what's happening across the country. I know some states have reopened while their cases were still kind of trending upwards, which is not something we've done in Michigan. But I think it's going to be important for people to continue to take this seriously.
I want to get to the statistic that continues to vex a lot of the state's doctors and scientists, and I know it's one that's vexed you. The fatality rate in Michigan seems to be somewhere between 9 and 10% of the people who have gotten this virus have ended up dying from it, which is about 10 times higher than we see it in most other places. Have we been able to come up with an explanation for why it's so much higher, so much deadlier in our state?
So I think when you talk about the case fatality rate, that's really dependent on the people who are getting tested. So it's the number of people who died out of the people who were tested. I think, unfortunately, what the national story is going to be when we look back on our response is that we did not get testing out the door quickly enough or robustly enough. And quite frankly, I don't know that we ever will, as a country, be able to test sufficiently. So I do believe that that case fatality rate is probably a little bit lower. There are plenty of people who are asymptomatic or who have mild symptoms or who have not gotten tested. But we will continue to monitor, and certainly there's no question this is absolutely a very deadly disease, particularly for those who have chronic medical conditions or who are older.
But the lower numbers, the lower fatality rate, you would think would be true everywhere because testing has been a problem all over the place. So I guess the good news is you would expect the fatality rate is lower than we expect because so many more people have had the disease. But even though I understand that Michigan had a very intense experience with this very early, before we understood protocols, it still doesn't quite seem to square. And I wonder, are we counting differently than the rest of the country?
I certainly can't speak about every state and what they are doing, but we have done a great job as far as counting our deaths to make sure, again, we have an accurate view of deaths related to COVID-19. So we cross-check our database as far as positive lab tests and people who have died. And of course, we also look at our death certificates. That is best practice. We've gotten a lot of great feedback from our CDC colleagues about doing it in that way. But that is how we're doing it here in Michigan.
I want to get to the way we treat this disease then, because it seems to me if we do have, and this is a theory of my wife Corey's actually, if we do have a vaccine that is still a long, long way away, a cure is not really on the landscape right now, then what we're going to need to do is come up with ways of making this a less deadly disease and one that that we can treat with more efficacy. Are we getting better at treating the disease as we've gone along?
Well, I know there are many studies that are coming out about different medications, and perhaps they may have some efficacy. But I'll tell you, the most important thing we can all do, and really that's for any infectious disease, is prevention. And there is a way to prevent people from getting COVID-19. Yeah. That is social distancing, washing hands, all the things we've been talking about. So that continues to be the strongest tool we have in the toolbox right now, and it's why it's so important that people continue to adhere to these recommendations.
Well, you're like everyone else. I imagine you go out and you see people that are sort of baffling to you in the way that they behave out in public, but somehow the mask has become politicized, which is not a great place to be, is it?
Yeah, I just make public health recommendations. It's not a political thing. It's a way to protect people from getting sick, and it's a way to save lives. So it's unfortunate what's transpired across our country with making masks political. It absolutely is not. It's just a matter of public health.
I want to get to an issue now that I and many others have struggled to understand, and that's the nursing home issue in Michigan, where about a third of the deaths in our state have occurred. Putting patients with COVID who are somewhere between hospital and home convalescence into nursing homes where the most vulnerable population already lives is very strange to many people. And it seems to me like it's a little bit like saying, I don't know what to do with this boa constrictor, so I'm going to put it in the nursery with the babies until I can figure it out. Why does that continue to be, because some other states have dropped that as a policy, why do we still think that that's a good idea?
Yeah, so I don't think anyone is pleased with what's happened as far as the people who are dying in nursing homes. But I'll tell you, I don't know that other states have necessarily figured it out. If you look at national numbers, it's similar as far as the number of cases and deaths in nursing facilities. So I think it's something we're all really struggling with. I can tell you that we did not actually mandate that any nursing home take any residents that they did not feel comfortable with taking when it comes to staffing or PPE. But we continue to just really work hard, and we take this very seriously. Earlier this week, we actually issued a mandate so that all nursing homes now have to test their staff and their residents to make sure that we're keeping those residents as safe as possible. And that's in addition to other things we've already done, regional hubs, so safe places for residents to go, working on staffing support for those nursing homes. And we've reached out to over 300 nursing facilities to provide technical assistance, working with the CDC as well to make sure they are implementing best practices.
I've had a lot of people ask me, though, we never saw a whole lot of patients needing the space at TCF Center, Old Cobo, or Suburban Showplace that were set up as these field hospitals. Why weren't those a better idea for these people who were somewhere sort of in the middle of needing intense care and yet not being able to go home?
I'll say it's actually a good thing that we did not need to use those facilities. Where we were looking in the beginning of April, when we first were starting to see the surge in cases, we thought that our hospitals would be overwhelmed and we would need all of the space that we planned for. So again, because of all the work that Michiganders did, we did need to use that space. I can tell you, we talked to a lot of our colleagues and our partners who oversee nursing homes, and these spaces, we want to make sure people are in a safe place. So the two alternate care facilities were not actually set up from a space perspective or staffing perspective to be able to give high quality care to nursing home residents. And so that's specifically why we did not use those facilities. Someone would have had to go and walk to the bathroom, for example. We did not have the direct care staff that a lot of, especially someone who's bedbound, a lot of the supports that a nursing home resident would need. And so we don't want to cut corners when it comes to quality of care for patients. And so that is why we were unable to use those facilities.
Lastly, let's get to schools, which was a lot of the big talk this past week from the governor. What are your biggest concerns now with trying to get kids back into school? And is that a wise idea at all? We understand that kids may not be as susceptible to the disease, but we also understand they can act as carrier pigeons, taking it back and forth between households.
Right. So I also have 3 school-age children, and I certainly understand the importance of wanting to provide our children with a quality education. And quite frankly, parents have to be able to work, go back to work, and have a place to send their children. So I think it's going to be important. I'm working very closely with our stakeholders across the state to be able to come up with a plan that really keeps everyone safe, implements the best practices. And of course, if we see that there's any concerns, there's an uptick in cases, we can always pivot. And there may be places where schools have to close for a period of time. But I do think it's important that we think through how we can continue to educate our children in the best way possible.
Staying agile here does seem key. Dr. Khaldun, I know you're somehow operating on 30-hour days. I appreciate you giving us the time, and stay well.
Oh, thank you for having me. Stay well.
You bet. When we come back, we'll talk about the hot issue of mail-in voting in Michigan. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
The COVID-19 crisis has been the greatest challenge I've faced as a nurse, but I've never been prouder of my Beaumont teammates for helping to lead Michigan through it.
Now we're pleased to say we're open for all your medical needs.
Whether your screening or procedure was postponed or you're in need of care now, our Beaumont team has created a safe environment for you.
At Beaumont, there's no quit in us.
And you can be confident
we'll take great care of you.
The biggest 4th of July sale ever starts now at Gardner White. This weekend, save an extra 15% off the sale price, plus 0% for 20 months. We say yes to credit with 0% for 60 months. Dining rooms just $10 a month. Living rooms only $25 a month. Bedrooms plus a free TV, $19 a month. Plus free delivery on everything. The 4th of July sale at Gardner White, Detroit's new #1 furniture store.
For every legendary joke, for every life lesson, fathers can be strong. And fathers can be vulnerable, whether face-to-face or worlds apart. Their support, their love, knows no bounds. So to the dads who are sturdy through every storm, and the ones who always bring the fun, your love is so important. Thank you. We hope you find a special moment just for you. Happy Father's Day from Local 4 and Click on Detroit.
All right, now to an issue I've been wanting to get to for some time, and that's the issue of mail-in voting. We have seen quite a dust-up over 2 different parts of this issue, really, the ballot integrity of mail-in voting in general, but also the mass mail-out of ballot applications in Michigan. And let's talk about it with the Secretary of State of Michigan, Jocelyn Benson. And you were, of course, the one who made the decision to send out all those applications. So as I parse these 2 different sides of it, let's start with whether it was appropriate for you to send the applications to people who didn't request it in the first place. You've been criticized, especially by conservatives, for that.
Yeah, and interestingly, Republican secretaries of state in other states are doing the same thing, and we're all finding great success with it, meaning that there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And it's really important for us as the chief election officers of our states to give people a certainty and the clarity of how to participate safely in our elections this year. And in Michigan, everyone has a right to vote by mail, and it's a new right. It's one that was enacted by voters in 2018. So I actually have a responsibility as the chief election officer of the state of Michigan to ensure people know how to exercise that right. And the other reason why our decision was so important was because, and we saw this in the presidential primary, a number of groups and a number of local clerks are deciding and will decide to also mail applications to residents or list members or group members to vote by mail. And to me, it was important that your ability to vote by mail, the ease of which you can get that application, not be dependent on where you live or what lists you may or may not be on. So for us doing the mailing, make sure everyone has equal footing. You've
already heard, though, of course, that we've seen applications go out to people who have passed away or people who no longer live at that address. And critics say, well, there's proof that this is filled with problems to just send these out in a mass way.
Yeah, it's actually quite the opposite. I mean, there had not been a statewide mailing like this done in 9.5 years in our state. And so, yeah, a lot of those applications are going to reach outdated records in our file. And what that does is actually help us increase the accuracy of our list by updating those files. We're asking everyone, and many have, return those applications unopened to our local clerks or even to our office, which we then forward. And that enables us to use that information to update the voter file effectively in the way that we're legally able to do. So it's actually promoting voter integrity by doing this mailing as well.
Well, that's assuming that all those voters are benevolent voters. Isn't there a way then for me to see, oh, an application came to this house to somebody who used to live here? I can get 2 votes out of this if I want.
But you can't get 2 ballots. You can only get a ballot that's affiliated with your signature. And there's a really strict protection process. We're actually upgrading our signature verification software with the state this election cycle to ensure that when you sign that application, your signature is then matched with your voter file, and that's used to send you a ballot. And that ballot still won't count unless you sign the outside of the envelope as the voter, and then that signature matches all the other signatures. And of course, forgery of a signature, particularly with elections, is a crime. And we have an investigative team already in place at the Department of State that can investigate allegations or any type of evidence, forgery or other types of fraud.
What, in general, the president, of course, has criticized this and criticized you in particular. Where are you on defending the viability of mail-in voting, aside from the ballot application issue, the integrity of basically absentee ballots?
It's so interesting because I'm essentially just defending the will of the voters. The voters enacted this change in our Constitution, and again, it's my job to implement it, and I'm proud to do so. And so in doing that, we're working to educate, and because again, it's a new right, all citizens, in the midst, frankly, of significant partisan efforts to try to sow seeds of doubt in the integrity of the process. But what we have on our side are decades of states led by Republicans and Democrats across the country who have been implementing vote by mail with much success, with infinitesimal levels of fraud, and doing so in a way that voters approve of. And so, I'm proud to be on the side of the voters here. More than 2/3 of our electorate in Michigan support this option to vote by mail. And then we're also working to make sure that in-person option remains available and safe to voters throughout our state this year as well.
Lastly, Justin, you're not a doctor or a health official, but I'm curious as to your outlook for whether or not you are going to want, or Michiganders are going to want to be at the polls in person come August and November.
Well, we have the information gleaned to us by running a local election on May 5th in the height of the pandemic to create a blueprint of exactly how to ensure that all citizens have safe options, even if we are in the height of what we hope is not the case, another wave or any type of health issue, where people will be able to safely vote from home if they choose to. And that's again why this mailing was so important, to give folks that certainty that it will be in place no matter what. And no matter what, we will have a safe in-person option as well. We're working to get PPE, masks, gloves, and the rest to our election workers throughout the state. And we encourage members of the public to sign up to be election workers as well, to help us ensure we're able to fully staff our precincts and provide that safe in-person option also.
Hindsight's 20/20, but should we have voted in person in the primary, or would that have been a pretty good time for us to stay home as the start of this?
Well, a significant number of people did vote by mail in that primary. And we know, coronavirus hit our state shortly thereafter. There's no evidence that there was any sort of spread of the virus that we know of through that primary, but we're glad to have the tools in place to ensure safe elections moving forward.
Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, I know we will talk about this more with you as we head toward Election Day. Thanks so much for the time today.
All right, thanks. Good to see you.
You bet. All right, so let's now hear from the other side of the matter. One of the leading critics of Jocelyn Benson's approach is the Kent County Clerk, Lisa Postumus-Lyons. Lisa, thank you so much for being with me today. You're familiar, I think, with the arguments that the clerk has just laid out, but I want to start with these two different issues. There is, of course, the issue of sending out the applications, but let's start with how you feel in general about mail-in balloting, which many people just understand as absentee balloting. Are you okay with the efficacy of that?
I want to be very clear. This issue isn't about whether or not people can or should vote absentee. I support secure absentee voting. In fact, when I was in the legislature, I helped lead the charge to expand no reason absentee voting, much to the chagrin of my own party. So I do support secure absentee voting, the process that we currently have in Michigan. People have the right to cast an absentee ballot, and I think people are aware of that right.
Then we've heard from everyone from the president on down, though, that there's something missing in our security around mail-in voting. And as a clerk, how would you address people's concerns about that?
Whether anybody in Michigan chooses to exercise their right to vote in person on Election Day or via absentee ballot, I want our voters here in Michigan to know that they can cast their ballot with confidence in the security and the integrity of our election. The way our system is set up, it's decentralized here in Michigan, very much administered at the local level. And that's a big advantage when it comes to security and integrity of the election. So that's an advantage. We have a two system check when we verify a voter's signature. We check it when they apply before we send the ballot, and then we check it again when the ballot comes in. We check their signature with a voting file. So Michigan's absentee voting process, as it is secure. And that's what I'm concerned about with what is going on and what these changes the Secretary of State is making.
Well, then given all you've just laid out, what's wrong with sending out applications to everyone?
Well, the bottom line first is it's illegal. There are 2 court cases that have determined that the election officials only have the authority and power that is expressly granted to them in statute. And nowhere in statute does it provide election officials the ability and authority to send an absentee ballot application unless the voter themselves requests it, either verbally or in writing. So we have that in court case. It's not changed, even though Proposal 3 enacted no reason absentee voting. That changes nothing with regard to the legality and the authority of election officials to do their jobs and what those jobs are. So first, that's a problem. Now, the law could be changed to make it legal, but that's a job for the legislature, not the Secretary of State. And
well, let me ask this, though, because those original cases were local clerks who were sending out, and they were at odds with, at that time, the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State now is Jocelyn Benson, and I guess some would argue that she is the now leading election official, and policy can be set by her on the way to carry out an election. Is there any validity to that argument?
Well, again, going back to what the court cases determined was that elected officials have the power and authority that is only expressly granted to them in statute. And this statute, the election law, does not provide any elected official, any elections official, to send unsolicited absentee ballot applications, whether it's the local or county clerk or the Secretary of State. And so, like I said, I support absentee voting, but I also strongly support the rule of law. And we need to make sure that we are conducting our elections as provided for in the Constitution and in our state statutes to ensure and guarantee the confidence that our voters can have that our elections are secure.
So to you, that decision of voters 2 years ago to change it to no reason needing to be offered for absentee voting doesn't change the law itself enough?
It does not change the law. The only impact Proposal 3 had on absentee voting was that it guarantees every voter the right to request and cast a ballot. It does not change any election official's authority or responsibilities to conduct the election.
I've only got about 30 seconds left, Fred, Lisa, but now that all those applications have gone out, if you get your way, if you were to win your argument, how would you rectify it?
Well, this has created a huge mess. We have returned ballot applications going to the state instead of to the local governments, where we're better equipped to clean out the voter rolls. Mm-hmm. The state plan to clean out the voter rolls as a result of this. Apps are going to dead people who have moved, non-citizens, and even 16-year-olds. This is why the law requires voters to request an application. And there are continuous changes. The bottom line is the Secretary of State is using this pandemic as an opportunity to advance an activist agenda without regard to the law, legislative purview, local control, and it really is eroding confidence in the security and integrity of elections here in Michigan.
Lisa Posthumus-Lyons, the Kent County Clerk. Lisa, I so appreciate the time today and the thoughts. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Devin.
You bet. We'll take a quick break. We'll wrap things up for Flashpoint right after this.
It's always more for less at Gorman's 3-day clearance center. That's more quality, more style, and up to 70% off best brands. Gorman's 3-day clearance center. Every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Learn more at gormans.com.
Recent statistics show a large percentage of Michiganders can save over $1,000 a year by refinancing. Call 248-308-5000 or chat with us online at davidhallmortgage.com. Lower payments, better options, more personal attention.
As temperatures skyrocket and your AC feels the pressure, now is the perfect time to insulate. Don't suffer through a hot house and high energy bills. Insulate now and cut your energy bill up to 50% with Ace & Sons.
Call today and get 15% off installation.
There's a reason we have more cars, more brands, and more selection than any other dealer in Michigan. The reason is you. With 43 Michigan locations and 34 different brands, the Suburban Collection has more ways to make your purchase, service, and overall automotive experience the best in Michigan. From your first car to your dream car, and everything in between. Go to drivesuburban.com and get your car today.
Unprecedented times, unprecedented savings. At Gorman, save an incredible 50% off all Cheryl designer seating and all Canadel custom dining. That's 50% off 2 of America's best brands. Now, for a very limited time at Gorman's.
The crowd of 125,000 people carried signs as tens of thousands more watched from sidewalks and buildings.
57 years ago, Martin Luther King Jr. led the Walk to Freedom along the streets of Detroit.
Today, the walks and protests to end racism are filling our streets again.
A lot of people have anger that they don't know where to put.
How does this moment in Metro Detroit connect to the historic Walk to Freedom?
Spirit of Detroit, fulfilling the dream. Tuesday at 10 p.m. on Local 4 and click on Detroit.
Quick programming invitation to you. I hope you'll join us Tuesday night live here on Local 4 for our special program, Spirit of Detroit, Fulfilling the Dream. Kim Gill and I at 10 p.m. on Tuesday night. I hope you'll be here for that. Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit is coming up here next on Local 4, and right after that, it's Meet the Press. Thanks so much for being here today. Have a happy Father's Day, and we'll see you next time back here for Flashpoint.